What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning in today. We are kind of all over the place with our guests jumping in. We got, um, well, it's me, Will Brooks, Channel Chief, Fifth Wall Solution. We got Andy Runyon, who's our MSP Partner Success Manager. We got two other people on the hot cakes wagon today to talk about some pretty fun, trendy stuff going on in the insurance carrier, cybersecurity space. Josh, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and kind of where you're tuning in from, that'd be great.
Yeah, great to be here. So my name is Joshua Nicholson. I am a cybersecurity executive, a vice president for our strategic services for a company called Deep Seas. And Deep Seas is a managed detection response, primarily managed detection response company, platform based, that is a spin out from Booz Allen Hamilton. And from there, we had merged and acquired a couple other companies, and we're about 260 employees, and we have close to 1,000 in customers, and we really focus on assisting incident response teams with managed detection response overwatch to provide some of that review and monitoring of these environments 24/7. So that's probably our primary mission. I've been in cyber, as I was talking, 24 years. I started off in the Marine Corps, spent 5 years in the Marines. I did a stint in IT network engineering before dedicating my career to cybersecurity. And I've been with Deep Seas, Booz Allen before for about 3 years. So I'm glad to be on the phone with you. I'm on the call here today with you.
Yeah, this is awesome. Joshua, thanks so much for joining us. The reason we're bringing Joshua on is, you can tell from the title, MDR. We put new cool kid in parentheses because, if you're tuning in, you're an MSP, MDR has been around for a while. Joshua, Steve Pollock just commented, what is the company name again? You just want to...
Yeah, absolutely. Deepseas.com. And so in the deep seas is pretty much our branding. So it's pretty related to the Nautic theme and underwater, and it really aligns to our services. So it's not just a static shell of a company. We actually got some character, and our services are deep, deeper, deepest. And so it's called Deep Seas. So deepseas.com is where you can definitely find more information.
We'll circle back up at the end there so you can remind people where they can find you if they want to learn more. But again, we put MDR as the quote unquote new cool kid on the block because as MSPs, it's been around for a while, right? You know what MDR is, but it's interesting today because insurance carriers are starting to ask about it more, and we're seeing it actually affecting things like premium. I don't know if we're seeing it affect eligibility yet, but there are things going on there with MDR. So we figured, why not bring an expert on to tell us a little bit about this MDR thing? The other piece is Dustin Brolander, joining us from... Are you back home in Texas now, Dustin?
I'm back home. I'm in my messy home office. The screen blur on this thing does not work well enough for me.
I kind of see the steer skull back there, but I couldn't tell.
But no, finally made it back. You guys have fully converted me. I spent the first half of this week at an insurance conference. So awesome. I've been hearing about... They thought I was a genius. So Joshua, nice to meet you. I've been a longtime MSP owner, and then a couple years ago got involved with the Fifth Wall guys, and I got my insurance license and everything now. It's crazy. But awesome. I got to go to a cyber insurance conference this year. And so back to the MDR thing, everybody there's talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, my MSP, we've been using MDR since 2019, longtime Huntress customer. We're like, oh, like you're really ahead of the curve, huh? Like that you guys were using it that early? It was around. So it was a very interesting conversation.
We have over 460 customers in that manner. So we manage a lot of MDR solutions. So yeah.
Yep.
You guys were both at that conference together. Did you run into each other?
Oh, so that's funny.
You were at Net Diligence in Miami?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. I was. Yeah, probably saw you around there at several of the events. Yeah, I went to the Booz Allen drinks, the party that Booz Allen had there, and that was a big one. But yeah.
Joshua, you might have seen
the same thing.
You might have seen his feet because Dustin always wears the signature cowboy boots. So.
Oh, really? I need to look for that. What was interesting is they had guys in full suit and tie and with shorts on, like.
I saw that
everything in between.
Boxer shorts, and I was like,
there were
"What
a bunch
is that?"
of them. It wasn't just one guy.
Wow.
Yeah. It was like 3 or 4 guys, and I'm like, "What's a toga party? Is that their theme?"
That was the Bermuda folks, I guess.
I would love to walk around in my underwear and a suit on too. That seemed great. Yeah.
Awesome. So Yeah, we want to talk about MDR. We want to talk about all these fun things. If you're joining us today and you're in the chat, say hi. We'd love to hear from you. Ask questions as we go through. Any observations you have, anything you've been seeing from the MDR space, either from the insurance carriers, but also as an MSP trying to sell MDR, talk to your clients about MDR. I mean, it is becoming a very popular thing to be talking about, but I think there's still some confusion around it for a lot of clients talking about it, understanding it, all that kind of stuff. So we want to take some time to dive into it. Oops, that's the wrong one. So yeah, like we said, MDR, insurance carriers, cool new friend. So Joshua, I might toss this one over to you, but um,
Sure.
MDR in general, you want to just kind of give a brief overview of what that is for people tuning in? Because we, just to give some context, we do get MSPs on this. We also get insurance agents on this. So for everyone to kind of level set here and say, here's what MDR is really about, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of terms. Me coming from the military, I know there's terms and acronyms for everything. So I think that makes sense to kind of standardize this. Now, we look at the evolution of desktop security. We started off with antivirus years ago, and this is back in the 80s and early 90s. And we had malicious files. And so you had an antivirus scanning type capabilities, really based on files. As we've progressed, there's been more and more need that the desktop is on the edge of computing. The perimeter has dissolved, especially with cloud. And the desktop is where all your threats are emanating. People clicking on things, accessing different services, and so forth. So antivirus had to evolve. It evolved into an IPS, so a host-based IPS system. So now instead of looking at antivirus logs, it's looking at network connections. It's looking at signatures. It's looking at maybe attack data a little bit, and it protects it. It's a firewall combination antivirus in many ways. Now we have moved over the last 10 years. Really, the next generation here is what everybody's moved to is EDR. So EDR is endpoint detection and response. And so these tools are packed with functionality much higher than you would with just antivirus or host-based intrusion prevention. This allows incident responders like myself, when we're troubleshooting, trying to figure out if there's an intrusion, we're able to access that host. We're able to quarantine it, take it off the network. Yet our tools are still able to process it, able to look at artifacts and different elements from a forensics perspective, yet protect the network at the same token. A lot of these advanced moving lateral movements or living off the land attacks, they're never discovered by antivirus. And so as this has evolved, everyone knows we need to do is go to an EDR solution. Your CrowdStrikes, your SentinelOnes, Carbon Blacks, there's a number of them that are out there commercial level, and Huntress was another one that he had brought up earlier. So all these enterprises are moving to it, especially after breaches. That's the number one thing you see after a breach is most of these people who didn't have their controls in place are now implementing EDR solutions. Well, it's not as much just to have one in place. It has to be managed. You have to have people who are trained what to do, keep up with signatures. You have to be able to people say that's a false positive. This is a true positive. Someone has to say that's normal behavior. That way the system learns what is abnormal. And so it requires expertise. Well, a lot of these companies are banks and pharmaceuticals, or they just want to make whatever widget is that they do, whatever service that they do. They don't have time to hire a cybersecurity staff to understand and interpret this. So that's where MDR comes into play. It's managed detection and response. And so we're able to take 400 plus customers online, scale that, and use economies of scale, but also use a network effect. What we find in one environment on attacks day in, day out, we're able to utilize that in the platform for our other customers. So kind of that 24/7 worry that you have, am I going to have an intrusion at 2 a.m, at 3 a.m? Well, we deploy an EDR solution and we support like 6 or 7 different ones. And we provide a managed service. We create analytics for it. We have an advanced team that spun out with us from Booz Allen. They're former intelligence officers and so forth. So really know how to tune this right and build the trade craft. And that's what we do in IR. So when we have essentially overwatches, we'll have these IR providers that go in. We supplement them with an overwatch service, very similar to the military, where if you had a team, let's say you had a team of 8 Marines, you had 4 going into a target, you would always want to have 4 in overwatch that are looking, they're providing quick reaction force. If that initial breach team starts taking fire, they have someone who can get them out of there. You need that overwatch. Well, the same concept exists in incident response, where the IR guys are in the middle of figuring out what's going on. They're battling it. They have to go to sleep the same way anyone else has to go to sleep. So we provide 24/7 service to them, monitoring, and we'll shut down and quarantine in coordination to what things are on the ground, how the IR team is working things on the ground. So does that make sense? Hopefully that explains. I wanted to go from the evolution of antivirus to EDR to MDR, and that to us has just been really exploding because customers see the benefit of a managed service on that EDR 24/7.
That 24/7 part's really important too. I think that's what in the MSP space a lot of folks miss. I've seen 8x5 SOC. I originally started saying that as a joke, and then I've met a couple of people that do it. Real world, that's awesome. Maybe you're going to get a call in the middle of the night, but that whole problem of it's not a guaranteed thing, right? Somebody that I always use the phrase butts and seats, right? Somebody sitting there at 2 a.m. that's actively working, an analyst that's looking through everything versus a guy with a beeper. I know which one I'm putting my money on. So I think that's to me, for MDR, that's the most important part. Obviously, the training, knowing how to do it, but for MSPs, most of us don't have a team to be able to staff truly 24/7. I say staff deliberately, not talking about on call. So at 2 a.m., whenever the hacker hits your customer's network, Joshua and his team are there actually sitting there watching everything, and it's not Dustin with the cell phone. Hopefully he's not sleeping heavy tonight.
Yeah, there's a couple of now cost is actually something that I want to talk about a little bit here because it sounds like there are some comments in here about just how expensive MDR tools can be. I mean, well, one LinkedIn user whose name is Dustin, and for some reason is showing up here as LinkedIn user. Dustin, I don't know what kind of security measures you have on your LinkedIn profile, but one of the carriers mentioned it cost $1 million just to spin up an MDR team product. Are you talking about as an MSP, like if you wanted to do that yourself?
One of them had commented as they were kind of making this the year of MDR that, they said part of the reason we're providing it is it's really expensive. Joshua just kind of covered this, right? Most companies can't afford to do it. And I thought that was an interesting figure that they said, $1 million just to even get started providing MDR. So if you look at that on the, MSPs, how many of us can afford $1 million, just write a blank check, or not a blank check, but, $1 million check just to get started, right? That wasn't even the ongoing this, that, or the other. So I thought that was a really interesting, whenever we talk about, MSPs usually need to lean on a third party for this. $1 million, that's a big number to just get it spun up.
Yeah, I think this is what an MSP, if they wanted to do an MDR themselves, right? Is that
Yep.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I could tell you, I see that model fail a lot, and for the simple reasons you're either IT focused or you're cyber focused. It's really good to partner like with MSP, IT, and a cyber. Because they think of the problem differently, especially from infrastructure management and so forth. So partnering with a good MSP is critical in this space.
Yeah.
I just see some smaller ones that try to do IT and security at the same time, and they don't do either one really well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
JD is saying find a large enough MDR SOC player that has pods around the clock, not relying on AI or SIMs to trigger alerts. JD, good to see you, buddy. Thanks for commenting on this. And yeah, I mean that's it, right? It's like trusting purely in is that what we're kind of leaning in towards here? Like you're to purely trust on machines to handle everything versus having someone.
I think that's what it's asking. We don't do machine response on everything. Everything is human driven. So we do have systems and alerts and tradecraft that helps us make that decision quicker, faster, and pulls different data elements together. But none of this. Everything is responded by humans. So anytime you get a true positive, false positive, and he's exactly right. We create pods for that, and we have our service our customers in that way.
Right, which makes sense. I mean, right, you said like false positives. If you have a machine handling that, they might cut something off that didn't need to be cut off or whatnot.
Yeah.
Kyle actually put something awesome in here. He just said MDR just makes sense. It's the natural progression from MSSP. I think MSPs ought to learn how to work with MDR instead of against it. And I know that cost is often a lot of clients when MSPs are talking to them, the first thing they think of is dollar signs, right? I mean, that's where a lot of clients are living, and it's hard to think of something. But to your point before, Joshua, most clients who undergo an incident are now looking, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to have to implement something to prevent this in the future, especially from the insurance angle. You have carriers who are saying, hey, what'd you learn from this incident? And also, what have you done to prevent something like this? Or lessen the chances of something like this particular incident happening again. And usually that solution means protect your
Yeah.
endpoints.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think a
yeah,
lot of it is we look at after these breaches is there's no strategic direction. They make it okay. I need this better capability, this tool, but how does that work into a program? And so we use what's called a virtual CISO or CISO advisory services, where we drive the strategic items after a breach. So not only do we have the IR Overwatch piece, but we'll say, do you need a virtual CISO? You don't have that expertise. There's nobody applying on that, and then that helps take the remediation strategy moving forward. So because our customers, when they come out of an IR, are generally in bad shape and they need some remediation and they need it to get back on their feet. So yeah.
And Josh, I mean, to that point, having been in cyber insurance now for 5 years, I mean, we've started to see at the small to medium sized business level, we've started to see an uptake in preventative measures and preventative controls. Right? We've seen more people adopting MFA, more people adopting EDR. We've seen more people with security awareness training than we did 5 years ago. What I don't see is I don't see a lot of more people with an incident response plan, to your point, right? So I think that, those services combined with the VCISO and, I think that's an area that I still see in my role that small to medium sized businesses are lacking of, did I just download a template from CISA and slap my name on it for my IR plan because the insurance company said that I needed one, right? Or do I have a offline, custom, regularly updated, tabletop once a year incident response plan? And we're still not seeing that at a very high rate.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, the bigger enterprises that we deal with, we have a good amount of big enterprises and we have a good amount of small, medium business. So we have to be very good at servicing both kind of those markets. And you'll see the different ones, the bigger ones have the IR retainers there for the emergency. And I view the IR retainer is break glass. That's where almost like your homeowner's insurance policy, right? Where the house burns down or floods or whatever, you're covered. But if the AC goes out or the hot water goes out, the homeowner's insurance policy then cover that. But you're out thousands. How do you do that? That's a home warranty policy. So you can see where we layer a lot of times of making sure you have that retainer in place in case you need a breach coach. We need attorneys involved. You need to disclose. You have regulatory requirements to disclose your SEC stuff. So you can imagine going down that route. And then we have things like, for instance, IR Assist, where we get incident response people on the phone and screen share. We figure out what is your problem and we triage it. And then we recommend that you pull the retainer or what we find is our customers can lose a lot of money by pulling that emergency handle like that. And it wasn't necessary. It was something that could be handled just by some incident responders reviewing it. And so we try to provide that kind of full coverage for that.
Yeah, that's a nice thing on on MDR too, is right. You have back to earlier, Joshua, you were talking about, most of the small businesses, MSPs don't have the expertise to know the difference. Speaking from experience in our MSP, our MDR provider Huntress, that at one point they slapped the big red button, isolated the whole network at a customer and said, guys, you need to, pull in an IR team immediately. And that's something that the majority of MSPs may not realize, or they're probably going to catch it too late. Time is of the essence on this stuff. The sooner you identify it, the sooner you stop it, the less damage is going to happen.
Well, and I think where MSPs can help out too is that in IRs, I've had problems sometimes when there's multiple vendors in play and you're trying to go across and execute. Okay, where's this data at? How do I get into that system? I think sometimes having that tabletop with third parties involved in it would be tremendously valuable, because that's where I see breaks every time there is an incident. You're dealing with a third party that you never talked about. What would we do if there's an incident? How do I take that system offline? How do I do X, Y, and Z? And that's where the rubber meets the road. So,
yeah. So I want to circle this back because this is good. Bringing this back to MDR for a second, because like we said, it's insurance carrier's cool new friend, right? And Dustin, maybe you've run into this. Andy, I'm sure you've run into this. The MDR piece. What are carriers asking about? What are they looking for? How's it affecting policies? All that kind of stuff. Because we get the understanding of what MDR is, but what's going on in the insurance space around MDR?
I'll let Andy take point on this one.
No, it's all good. So essentially, let me go back to go forward, right? So a couple of years ago, we talk about this regularly, right? Pre-COVID, insurance underwriting around cyber insurance was, are you in the marijuana industry? Are you in adult film? You know, it was stuff like that, right? And if that was a no, then have you had a breach in the last 2 years? No. Okay, great. What's your revenue? How many employees? Here's your policy, right? Like, I mean, anybody that's listening to me talk, like that's where we were at when I came into the industry. But then COVID hit, cybercrime shifted down, to Main Street. Now all of a sudden we start underwriting more. We start asking more questions. And the big thing that came out of that was multi-factor authentication, right? And it was like, okay, if you don't have MFA, what you're going to face is denials, increased premium, higher deductibles, sublimited coverages. Those are really the four things, right? And where I see this going, because this, I mean, guys, honestly, this is a new emergent thing. I mean, one of the things that we pride ourselves on at Fifth Wall is like we try to educate and keep people up with where the Frisbee's going, not necessarily where it's at right now. And what I see coming in the future and what we think will be the case is that MDR will be a driver similar to what MFA has been in the past. If you are of a certain revenue, I mean, are we going to have are we going to have MDR requirements on single shop dental offices that do $1 million in revenue? I don't know about that, right? But if you're of a certain revenue, as we climb the revenue ladder, right? If you're in an industry that is highly trafficked and has been hit very hard recently, and you don't have some type of MDR solution, higher premiums, higher deductibles, sublimited coverages, potential denials, depending on the size of the organization and the sector you're in.
So
yeah, interesting note on the Andy said about the, is it going to be a hard requirement like MFA? So one piece that I heard that kind of blew my mind this week, Joshua, I'm not sure if you attended that session that was about underwriting small businesses, but one of the big carrier bosses was up there, and he said, I don't see us adding more than one or two more mandatory controls in addition to MFA. And so MDR might be one of those. They weren't really sure where it was going. Security awareness training is one that insurance absolutely loves. So, just based off of that in our discussion today, if I was a betting man, I'm wondering, is it going to be security awareness training, and MDR would be kind of the next two that would be a requirement.
And just, I mean, from our standpoint, I mean, if there's anybody out there listening in the wild, that's, a very small, I mean, small businesses is defined up to 50 million, right? If you're sitting out there, a retail shop in downtown Paragould, Arkansas, and you do $500,000 in revenue, I don't think that we're to a point to where your cyber insurance is going to be voided if you don't invest in MDR. That's not what we're saying. But we do see, I mean, very much so, and have seen over the last couple of years, carriers go, hey, $80 million rural hospital, $250 million revenue regional bank, we're going to hold you to a different standard than we are the small retail shop. So, yeah, absolutely, Dustin. That's a
really good point. And I think it's something we need to walk away with here is, look, I mean, there were some comments in here already of the difficulty of affording MDR, especially if you're a small business. It's the challenge. It's not cheap, right? And there is that piece of it where it's like, okay, for every insurance carrier to require every client currently to get MDR, no matter how small, I don't foresee that being a reality anytime soon, where they're just like, hey, MDR has to happen, right? But what I do see is, to your point, Andy, based on revenue, based on industry, there may be instances where MDR is required. And just to give a little bit of context here, is that carriers are consistently looking at their claims data, right? You've got actuaries who are building out risk profiles, and they're building out those risk profiles a lot of based on claims data. So they have these 14-page applications that they want filled out, and people fill out these 14-page apps, and they work through this whole thing, and then they look back and they say, okay, based on all these answers, based on the security that people had, where did the claims come from? What were people missing? And I think that's why MDR is starting to emerge as one of those controls that they're providing discounts on coverage for and things like that, because they're saying, hey, people who had MDR solutions enabled saw fewer disastrous claims than people who didn't. And that's the reality. That's what the data is showing.
I think you saw at the conference too that we were just at, they had payouts, what was related to their claims, and it was ransomware spiked by like twice. 200% spike in 2022, I think it was, for their payouts. I think they're just getting the data for 2023 together, but it was like tremendous spike, and it was all ransomware based. and traditional antivirus is no good at that, of managing that. So I do see maybe a requirement to have EDR. You have to have some enterprise detection and response
Yeah.
capabilities, and they're going to push the not antivirus is just not good enough. Too many environments that just get blown away with just antivirus. So I think they would mandate an EDR, but not, an MDR is the management of it. I think you just from a control perspective and audit, you have to prove you can manage it. Like if an alert goes off, you're going to have some guy managing. You're going to do something like that. So if you're a small business, I think you can get away with saying that. But I think EDR is definitely necessary. The MDR, when you're managing it, the benefit of that is tremendous. You have to look at it from your asset perspective and what assets and how valuable are, how am I trying to protect that? But the way we scale with the MDR solutions now allows us to provide a tremendously valuable service at a much smaller cost because it's spread out across so many different customers. And so it becomes a unit of economics for these companies because they don't have to hire the staff. They don't have to train them. You don't have to keep up with the latest threats. When those alerts come off in your environment, you don't have to worry about what does that really mean? I don't know what that alert means. What should I do about it? We've had customers just false positive because they don't have the experience to know what that is. So there's an economic and risk decision that has to be made. So I could see that they would mandate EDR, but MDR, depending on your size and your complexity and your risk model, I can definitely see them mandating MDR.
Yeah.
And what's gonna happen, and we've seen this, Dustin mentioned security awareness training. What's happening and what will happen moving forward is where we have carriers that'll say X control is directly related to Y coverage, right? So let's look at security awareness training. Before, it was a question of like, hey, are you doing it? It's a best practice. Now, today, it's directly related to your cybercrime coverage, right? So there's three main coverages on a cyber policy, right? There's first party coverage, third party coverage, and cybercrime. If you're of a certain revenue and you're not doing security awareness training, and there's not phishing simulation attached to that, and you don't have a wire transfer policy in place, odds are you're either not going to have cybercrime coverage or it's going to be sublimited from the standard 250K, right? And I think that that's where we're going with MDR, right? Obviously, MDR is key in thwarting ransomware attacks, right? There is a specific line item in a cyber policy related to ransom payment, right? Some people don't know this. I get this question all the time. They're like, you mean to tell me that insurance will pay a ransom payment? Yes, it will. Right. But if you go out and buy $5 million of coverage and you're of a certain revenue in a certain sector and you don't implement EDR or MDR, depending on what the carrier wants, I can definitely see a scenario where that ransom payment coverage now goes from 5 million to 250K or $1 million or something like that. I mean, that's, again, every carrier has the autonomy to do their own thing, right? It's very hard. I see Dan's question there about the carriers provide a discount for implementing MDR, and if so, which carriers? You know, we're not, we're carrier agnostic. We can't promote any specific carrier. At the moment, right now, do you have deep discounts for things like that? Some people, yes, are considering it more than others, right? Are we moving into 2024 where we feel like that MDR is going to be more heavily considered than it has been in the past? Yes, 100%, right? What it all comes down to is what carrier has engaged and offered a quote and considered the account, and what does that back and forth look like at the moment. But we're definitely, I can't sit here on February the 16th and say carriers X, Y, and Z are the ones that are giving you a discount on MDR, but we are definitely moving into a market that you'll see return on that investment.
Yeah, I know one piece is kind of that guiding star is always the high risk clients, right? Which I always joke is like half the industry, but that's where we've seen the EDR is required, right? And then they give you the list. Here's the ones you got to pick from. On the flip side of that, so last year I got to spend, thanks to Will and Reed and Wilson and everybody, I got to spend a ton of time talking to carriers about claims. And so Joshua hit the nail on the head earlier about, the EDR is just sitting there, but somebody that knows what they're doing has to be watching it. So my favorite thing talking to the claims folks, and I'm just advocating for MSPs are really important for SMBs, right? Because somebody's got to be in there that at least knows security these companies can't manage on their own. Is always asked the carriers, I'm like, when was the last time you had a claim? They had EDR, but it was sitting there in passive mode. And every single time, they're just like, oh yeah, we just saw that like 2 weeks ago kind of thing. So that goes back to Joshua's point of knowing, maybe you're an MSP that's capable enough. Maybe you got a partner, a Huntress, a Blackpoint, a Deep Seas that's in there managing it for you. But somebody has to have that expertise, has the eyes on it, that's handling it, not just don't install Sentinel-1 and go, right? That's half the battle. You got to get the full way out there.
Here's a good explanation. Sorry, real quick. As my friend Vince Kearns would say, MDR is like catching the fire in the kitchen and putting it out instead of finding that the whole house is now engulfed in flames. I always like to use the illustration too of like, you have a home alarm system, but all you do is set off an alarm when the bad guy breaks in. It's like, maybe he'll get scared off, but there's no one actively monitoring the system, right? And that's really your real difference. But I like this because it's saying, hey, it's better to put out that fire, stop it in its tracks, than to just let it burn and set off a fire alarm that says, hey, this whole place is burning down.
Which is, that's why we call it smoke jumping. When you do an incident response, you're like parachuting in and the forest on fire type thing. I think MDR, one of the questions asked, what's the point of having MDR if you don't what's the point of having EDR if you don't have it managed? Well, there is a use case where you can have it deployed properly and have a lot of updated signatures by a provider, and you manage it yourself, and you could set it to proactively block certain connections. And so it is a much higher level of functionality that can stop a lot of attacks by default out of the box. Even though there is that layer of MDR that takes it to a complete level, it's better than having nothing or having just antivirus. So having a properly deployed EDR is better than anything. But if you want that full
that's the key.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you have a small business that can't afford MDR, don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, don't get EDR. I mean, at the end of the day, it's better than nothing. And, it's interesting because I don't think carriers are going to remove next-gen antivirus anytime soon from their apps, only because I don't think they realize that EDR and next-gen antivirus are kind of like evolutionary stages. They just think they're these different things. And that's just the reality of they check yes or no boxes, right? So do you have EDR? Do you have next-gen antivirus? Well, you got Microsoft Defender. There's a good chance you have next-gen antivirus already. So just that kind of piece, right? And so there's all those levels.
Next-gen is a marketing term too. When people say that, do you have next-gen something? I could tell you all kind of next-gen things. So I think getting prescriptive, like EDR being able to handle malicious files as well as malicious network connections and potential lateral movement, that is common with internal breaches and privilege escalation attacks. So I definitely see where I can recommend an EDR, because at the end, it's not about recommending a service to sell because we got some revenue number to hit. It's how do I solve that customer's problem the best I can, given the limited resources and abilities they may have. In environments like OT, where you can't put EDR pretty much on anything, really difficult to get EDR on a manufacturing floor on some of these systems. And how do you protect that? Something gets in there and goes crazy, you have very limited tool sets. I see an evolution where you're going to have more EDR in these OT environments and a more collapse of IT OT type institutions. So does that make sense?
So Will, I'll give you a hot take that you can clip out, since that was the point of this show. But to Andre's question of does it make sense to put an EDR, I do think it's a step up from next generation AV. But back to Joshua's point, I love that he made it so early, is just that the expertise to manage it. Does getting EDR without MDR get you halfway there? I don't think so. I think that, the EDR is call it 30% of it. I think the MDR is a much more substantial part of that protection. So again, better than next generation AV, but it's not a 50-50 thing. I think the MDR component is much more important.
I wouldn't rip out your airbags just because you got a better seatbelt.
Yeah. So here's something that I want to pivot to a little bit, because this is where things get interesting. We had a lot of questions about, is it worth doing? It's way too expensive for people. Are they even going to implement it? What's going on here? Well, there's also another piece of news that we want to touch on, because I think it kind of lines up here with what we're talking about, where carriers start to ask more about controls and require controls and implement control, all that kind of stuff. Well, carriers now, and Dustin, I want you to kind of share your experience on this a little bit. Maybe don't name names, but you can get a little, tell us a little about what
I can never name names. So
yeah, please don't name names. But that said, we're seeing now that security controls are being sold by carriers. Is that right? Is that what's going on? Like, are they pitching their security services to clients?
Oh yeah. So this has been a, I think, long time coming. That if you go out there and you look, there's a couple that very publicly have even bought up MSPs, right? There's one that's really cool. They've, not as an MSP, but just in general, that they bundled in EDR, backups, the whole 9 yards. So it's like a comprehensive solution, right? But now what we're starting to see is kind of the more traditional carriers are starting to also. So they've always had a thing where it's like, oh yeah, go to even my MSP, our Tech E&O policy. I get solicitations once a month of go use our security awareness training stuff. And I'm like, you guys do not realize what we do here. But it's getting to be more and more common. And we actually had a carrier, again, big kind of legacy carrier, reach out to one of our customers a few weeks ago saying, hey, we have this cool new MDR thing. Have you heard about this? So it's getting a lot more direct competition, so to speak, right? Which as an MSP, you probably don't want them coming in and suddenly your customer's calling you up saying, hey, Andy, the insurance called me the other day. I bought this cool new thing to deploy. And you're like, we sell that, dude. Come on.
Yeah.
I've been asking you to
We've
do that for a while.
we've been trying to get you to do it for 2 years. Thanks for doing it with the insurance company.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it leads to a larger point, man. Like there's this huge pie out there and everybody's figured it out, right? Everybody's trying to get a larger piece of it as they go. And I mean, it doesn't take a long foray through my employment background to go back and look, where I've been previously. And I worked for an insurance company, right? That like they had a major push into managed services. And just me personally, this is my opinion. It's hotcakes, right? So we can share. My personal opinion is that insurance should leave insurance up to insurance and managed services should stay in that lane and everybody should stay in their swim lane and do their thing, right? For the longest time, and this was, I believe, incorrect, insurance was over here, managed services was over here. There was this massive wall in between us. Nobody could see each other. Nobody was talking, right? That wasn't good either, right? Yeah. Well, you don't want to fully remove that wall and just have everybody out there just running on top of each other and everything blending together. The allegory that I use all the time is there should be a 5-foot chain link fence, right? There should be a divide there. Insurance should be insurance and managed services should be managed services. Cybersecurity should be cybersecurity, but there ought to be visibility across the fence and you ought to be able to talk to each other. Right. Yeah. So personally for me, I would much rather have a company like Deep Seas managing my MDR than an insurance company coming in with a same name as the insurance product, because it does smell a lot like I'm just trying to make more money.
Divergent interests.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Joshua, Will knows this story. So whenever the original situation occurred on my MSP was, I replied back and I said, hey, you're the insurance carrier, this seems like a conflict of interest. Like 2 minutes later, the sales guy replies back and goes, no, sir, it absolutely isn't. I'm with a different company. It's carrier name Security Services Incorporated. I was like, all right, thank you for just confirming exactly what I thought.
I think they use a lot of partnerships too behind the scenes. So it's delivery or white labeled behind the scenes. Sure. They're not actually acquiring a lot of these companies. And very similar, my mother experienced this when I was growing up. She owned a daycare center and everybody brought their children to daycare center, especially after school. Parents were still working. Then all of a sudden the rules and laws changed and the school system started putting aftercare in the schools. It decimated the child care, because why leave your kid and send a bus to pick them up to bring them somewhere if I just go to the school late and pick them up? And you almost see, but now that it's shifted back where they're building daycare centers again because they're not getting good quality education and there's all these programs that are missing from the schools. So I think it's sort of the same way. You may see the carriers coming together to provide these services because it's coming up in so many of these breaches. And like anyone, they know who's good and who's not. And so they want to recommend and use people who are good, because in the end, their claims are reduced. It's less likely. We see where you have a second breach right after a first one, 3 months, 4 months later. And it's because the remediation efforts weren't there. They didn't have the right team. Like Deep Seas is really good at saying, okay, this is what caused the breach. We need to implement this. You need to do this. Here's your current state. Here's your future state. Here's your roadmap. We're not just a technical team that you hire out. And our focus is just on cybersecurity. We don't do anything with IT. We don't even try to do anything in IT. And I think that allows us to focus on just getting better for our customers when they need us. And that remediation, you have less claims.
It's
Yeah.
got to come down to efficacy. If that's going to happen, right? Like if a carrier is going to suggest a tool, they need to suggest it because it's more efficacious than the other tools out there. And there needs to be data behind that. They don't need to suggest that tool because they're making 7% on every sale, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
that's the thing. And I mean, I don't have any issue with the carrier coming in and saying, "Hey, we'll give you more of a premium cut if you use this tool," because based
Mhm.
on a third-party study, we found that tool is 4 times more efficacious in stopping ransomware. Right?
Yeah.
That's not an issue. Right? That's capitalist economy. Right? But
Yeah.
coming in and saying, "Hey, we've partnered with these guys behind the scenes and we're pushing this now because I mean, if it's
7%
not
if
as
you
good
buy
a
it
tool."
through us, kind of thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I
So
think that's where the rub is.
here's my
Mhm.
concern, right? I mean, business is business. People are going to sell things. My concern is looking at all these MSPs I've talked to, right? And how so many MSPs are maturity, security first mindset, right? Like, hey, we want you to understand that this is about security first. We want to secure your businesses. And it's really important to us that you understand that this industry is maturing. So security controls over time are going to evolve. Threats are going to evolve. I mean, Joshua, you gave us the history of EDR, MDR, next gen antivirus. Like, look at the evolution there. And that's only been a few short years. It hasn't been that long. Where's this going to be in 4 years, 5 years? Like
Yeah.
it's going to keep evolving, and clients are going to have to implement those evolved solutions to stay safe in this evolving tech world. And my concern is that carriers are going to provide security services that satisfy the insurance requirement, and that's going to leave clients thinking that's all I need.
Yeah.
And that's my biggest concern, is that when the insurance carrier is the one providing the security services, whereas the MSP is saying, "Hey, my thought process for you is future minded, so let's keep you understanding a path forward. Let's provide kind of a roadmap for projects of how we're going to keep implementing your security to keep you safe." The carrier saying, "Got to check the boxes. If you check the boxes, those are the things we're going to provide." And if the MSP is not doing the educational component of helping being that cybersecurity advisor for their clients, much more than just a box checker, then what's stopping the client from just going with what the carrier is providing? I think that's my biggest concern, is that the clients might end up being under secure because they're only checking the boxes that are making them eligible for a policy, and that's it.
False sense of security, mostly because they're doing risk management in one dimensional. They just view it as one dimension of insurance and not as overall risk. I mean, just for instance, some of these lawsuits I've seen and been a part of because of breaches, highly expensive from happening. You have breaches of confidential information. That third party sues this one. It just becomes a mess. So yes, you have the insurance claim of some of these ransomware. Then you have potential when you're paying the bribes, or not the bribes, when you're paying the ransom to get your data back. And then what they're doing now is when you don't pay, they announce it to the SEC and to the regulators and say, look, they didn't file and announce anybody, and I got their data, and boom, they extort them from a regulatory perspective. So they're hitting them on both sides. And you can see the
Mhm.
regulators are like, the cyber attackers are doing our job for us and telling us that this is really um, so it's become a bigger loss than just when they look at it from an insurance perspective. You have
Yeah.
reputational risk. You have all kind of operational risk. I was at a large pharmaceutical during COVID, so I was the cyber fusion center lead there, and I was running this big security operations center. And the supply chain was breaking down from attacks. Our third parties were getting hit, and they were critical to creating medicine. It was a precursor for certain drugs, and you can imagine if so many people are diabetes, and you're a major manufacturer of diabetes medicine, and then all of a sudden you're knocked offline by multiple carriers or multiple third party ASPs that you rely on, the supply chain breaks down. And in many ways did during COVID, and people's lives were put at risk. So you could see where cyber plays into these big events, and how I don't see how insurance companies could not mandate that. You know what? I know you don't want to spend the money, but these are some standards you're just going to have to do, or your insurance premium is going to be higher. And I think once you start getting to where insurance premiums can be brought down by certain controls, let's say you don't put any of those controls. That's fine. You ought to pay full price whatever the MSRP is for that. But if you want to start grabbing discounts and reduce the risk of claims, and then yes, this makes a good sense. You have to have a strategic outlook. First of all, who's doing what are we working on, what needs to be addressed. There needs to be some technology there that is automating that tool sets are giving you that visibility. You have to have some expertise that plugs into that, and you got to be able to handle infrastructure management and patching and of systems. So those two sides of the coin. Most of these companies get broken into, I find, fall into two major themes or three major themes. One, they clicked on something. Some admin clicked on something. So your phishing is still pretty big. I've seen multiple where Azure, they accidentally expose servers to the internet and RDP to the internet, and then they get hit and they get popped. And MFA was not on it because they went from long on-prem to Azure. And so these controls weren't there, or there were a breakdown in them. Change management. Somebody troubleshooting something on the firewall and left the entire firewall wide open when he was troubleshooting something. So you could see a lot of this blocking and tackling if small businesses got a better handle on it and could use MSP and MDR services wrapped to be highly efficient in a certain area. They could see magnitudes of security increase with a much smaller footprint than trying to hire these people yourself, trying to scale it and try to be there 24/7. And when you talk about a really small company, like 2 or 3 people, maybe sometimes it doesn't make sense from an MDR perspective. But when you look at your risk posture, you shouldn't be very expensive or have a high risk posture if you're a company with only 2 desktops. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's a great example of where, your big enterprise like Joshua and Deep Sea's awesome, but 2-person company, right? You got somebody cited like the sandwich shop down the street in Arkansas, right? Go find an MSP, make sure they got a Huntress or Black Point kind of thing. Like there's solutions at every size company to be able to do that. I wanted to sneak in one more thing before we have to wrap up here shortly. But kind of earlier, whenever we were talking about, what's being required and that false, that bar being too low, false sense of security. We always talk about insurance being like a little bit behind, right? That's just the nature of the business. It's not a shot at the industry, but it's backwards looking data. We got to wait for that to get there. So just like right now, we're hearing, MDR is a big deal, even though in the MSP industry, in enterprise security, it's been around for a little while. So from that perspective, you should be shooting to exceed the baseline requirements. If you're coming in and I'm saying as a company, right, as an SMB, if you're coming in going, it's 2024 and you're saying, shoot, I should add this MFA stuff. I literally just talked to a recruiting firm a couple weeks ago that was, of course, post-incident, right? Like we talked earlier, but they're like, oh, this MFA thing's really important. I was like, guys, it's 2024. Like, yeah, it's been important for a while, right? But so, should be meeting all that kind of thing, but it's like, what's coming up next? And that's always an interesting piece to me to see of there's that middle ground between being cutting edge cybersecurity, like all the cool stuff that Joshua's company is doing that they probably can't talk about. But then it's like, what's starting to hit that mainstream? And just tangent on it because this came up at the conference from the MSP industry. If you guys know LionGuard, I'm walking through the lobby and I hear, hey, Dustin, and it's Joe Alapat, who's the founder of LionGuard. I was like, what are you doing at an insurance conference, dude? You got on the wrong airplane. They're looking at it because LionGuard's always been kind of that configuration tracking. So now they're talking about attack surface management. So again, Joshua touched on this a little bit earlier. It's like, are those configurations right? So maybe it's not a vulnerability, but you did something dumb or accidentally, and you need to make sure that stuff's set up right. And it was cool watching Joe talk to the insurance guys, the carriers, their light bulbs going off, going, "Ooh, this is something important." So we'll probably see it next year, sort of thing. But just as those controls evolve, as the industry is just again catching up, using that data to be able to say, "Ooh, this is important." It gets there just 12, 18 months after kind of that leading edge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that really, I think, solidifies the point of this whole thing is when we go back to carriers offering their own security services, if the insurance carrier is basing their security recommendations off of past data, then if your client is going to implement the security controls that the carrier is providing, are they really adequately preparing or securing your client like they should be? It's not saying they're not good services, but it's really saying, has the carrier really looked at saying, hey, you know what, we're in 2024, but my security controls that I'm providing are actually ones that were really good protection in 2022, right? It's like that kind of mindset. So I think just as an MSP, I mean, just if I were to leave you with something on this call, I mean, if you're an MSP listening in, your goal here is to become that cybersecurity advisor, so that when your clients get something from their carrier and their carrier is saying, hey, we offer an MDR tool, the first thing they're doing is coming to you and talking about it, not saying, because I mean, I
Sign
don't
me up.
blame an agent. Think of it, agents for a second trying to get these cybersecurity forms or cyber insurance forms taken care of. I mean, they're banging their heads because they don't know what most of this stuff means anyway. And they're like, oh man, so many times a carrier has come back and said, oh, you don't have EDR on your endpoint, so we're declining coverage. But now the carrier's saying they provide EDR, so I can just tell my insured that they can get EDR through the carrier. That's easy. That makes my job easier, right? So instead, what you really need is when a carrier provides that you can be priming the pump for your clients here. Hey, look, your carriers may offer you this. We provide it already. So, and you already have it. I mean, that's a great conversation point too. You may already have it, but it's that mindset of take the reins. We always say this, take the charge, take the reins. Because if you don't, the insurance carrier is often going to come in and try and pull them out from under you. And that's kind of my final thought here as we wrap up. Any other final thoughts, guys? We got about 3 minutes here.
My takeaway headline is going to be Will Brooks, think of the poor agents.
Yeah, mine is, in the future, artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. So we're going to have a lot of this moving forward. You're going to have a lot of saying, well, AI is just going to take this on and we'll just get AI to do this. And just, it's emerging technology. I think everybody should be careful with it, but I see it helping from statistics perspective, and anomalies definitely helps us out a lot. I talked a lot about it on my podcast, Cybersecurity America. So that having AI has always been a topic of, do I need an AI readiness assessment? Do I even have clean data to do machine learning? People don't realize you just don't turn it on and it just goes across your network and just discovers everything and tells you things. I see that as being something in the future to look at. How does insurance and carriers, how do they use AI to make certain decisions? Are they going to make actuary decisions using AI? If so, how do they need MDR data on how many alerts we're seeing? And I mean, so I could see how that plays into future business. So
that could be a fun one. Andy?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, my takeaway is at the MSP level. I spend my days with MSPs, right? And guys, if your MSP is still using the same tools that you were using 5 years ago, get ready, right? Like get on the cutting edge, look into, companies like Deep Seas. If you don't have an MDR solution currently, if you don't offer that, right? I had an MSP lose a client recently over an MDR scenario, right? Like they asked about their MDR solution, the client did, and the answer that they gave, the client didn't like, and they went, well, sorry guys, we're going to go a different direction, right? Passwordless MFA, right? Like it's coming, right? Get on the cutting edge. So that's my takeaway. That and happy opening day for college baseball today. Go Tigers and go Red Wolves.
I know nothing about any of that.
Hey,
you're enthusiastic
no
about
judgment.
it. So.
I just wanted to snake it in. Yeah.
Classic. All right. Hey, everyone, thanks so much for jumping in. Joshua, Dustin, thanks for joining us today to have this conversation. I think it was really awesome. Again, if you have any questions, anybody, totally reach out. We are pumped that you're able to listen in here, and we are signing off here. We will talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.